Although it found its way onto the internet a little earlier than developer Capcom had planned, the Resident Evil 3 remake was officially announced at PlayStation's December State of Play event, and we are officially very excited. As big fans of both the Resident Evil 2 remake and of Jill Valentine in general, we can't wait to visit Raccoon City once again with the Master of Unlocking. Thus, armed with what we know so far, here's everything we want from the Resident Evil 3 remake. You want stars? I'll give you stars. First and foremost, Resident Evil 3 needs a fleshed out campaign like the one the new Resident Evil 2 got. The biggest criticism aimed at the original 3, even at the time of its initial release, was that it was super short, just a few hours long. And there is definitely room to expand on the events surrounding it this time around. And to be fair, it sounds like Capcom is already working on this point, given that it's already confirmed that Carlos Oliviera will be given a bit of an expanded playable role, and that he and Jill will be controllable in a similar way that Claire and Leon worked in the Resident Evil 2 remake.
If you say so. But my head feels like it's about to explode.
Perhaps Carlos and his fancy new hairdo will have an entirely new scenario to play through, spanning a longer period of time than simply hunting down a vaccine for Jill. The original Resident Evil 3's time frame spanned both before and after the events of Resident Evil 2. And now that the RE2 remake has streamlined and updated some of those narrative beats, the RE3 remake can follow suit, and maybe answer some leftover questions and expand on some unseen events too. Like, what did Jill do in the time between the mansion and now? What is Chief Irons up to during this time? And what about Wesker? There's a lot of material the dev team could potentially work with here. Of course, like Resident Evil 2's remake, the new Resident Evil 3 will feature completely overhauled graphics and gameplay, and feature the same over-the-shoulder camera perspective, rather than the fixed camera angle perspectives of the original RE games. And we love the look of it so far, and the opportunity to see a lot more of the updated Raccoon City in the midst of the outbreak. As we mentioned before, Resident Evil 3's timeline spans both sides of Resident Evil 2, so there are lots of opportunities to overlap and tie the two remake titles together. In the original RE3 game, Jill arrives at the police station about a day before Leon and Claire, but she leaves by the time they both arrive on the scene. Yet a new achievement added to the 2019 RE2 points to the tiniest of interactions between the characters, as Jill leaves behind a letter that the RE2 protagonists can find and read. As of making this video, the achievement exists, but the letter has yet to be added into the game. So maybe we'll read Jill's letter in Resident Evil 2 and witness her writing it in Resident Evil 3. And what's in the letter? Well, most likely a warning of some kind. Jill would want to give others a fighting chance against returning big bad, Nemesis, especially after he performs an emergency and fatal lobotomy on another STARS member, Brad Vickers, on police station grounds. Maybe the patch that adds in the letter to the RE2 remake could also add in Zombie Brad for old time's sake. It's just an idea. But in general, we need more Easter eggs. It's fantastic that these remakes are a way for new players to discover the Resident Evil franchise, but Capcom also needs to give long-time RE fans plenty of references and nods to RE secrets. Because there's lots to work with, and it's a lot of fun trying to piece everything together. When you're not being chased down by this guy, of course. Anyway, speaking of Nemesis, the Tyrant Seeing Stars has of course been redesigned for the RE3 remake and is just as horrific as he's ever been. We're not entirely loving his squished nose and weirdly long teeth just yet, but we have faith that Nemesis will soon make Resident Evil 2's Mr. X look like an absolute pussycat. The dev team have already confirmed that Nemesis will be way more relentless than Mr. X, pushing players to be constantly looking over their shoulder, utterly clueless as to where he'll turn up next. And apparently, he'll have more ways of tracking his target, that's you, than Mr. X did. Does this mean he'll be able to do more than just hear you as you make your way through the city? We're not so sure. We're looking forward to finding out, but if we could ask one thing from the updated game, it'd be for the remake to give us a way of escaping Nemesis's clutches. Nemesis? The original RE3 introduced the ability to dodge attacks and perform 180-degree turns to evade enemies, which made sense, given Jill's advanced training as a member of STARS. The Resident Evil 2 Remake didn't have a dodge option, and sometimes that felt sorely missed in tight corridors when faced with Mr. X or a bottleneck of zombies. Now's the time to give us ways of avoiding Tyrant's clutches at the last minute, which should also allow us to save some precious ammo too, when fleeing is a smarter option over fighting.
Oh no. It's him!
Another thing Resident Evil 3 introduced was the live selection mechanic, a clever feature that presented players with a range of split-second decisions throughout the game. During key moments when you'd be between a rock, a hard place, and usually a flesh-eating horde, a prompt would appear on screen and you'd be tasked with choosing between two actions or suffering damage. These choices affected not only what course the story would take, but also which ending you would get. And they definitely need to return in the remake, as they'd add a ton of replayability to what could be a short campaign. Also, Resident Evil is a horror game at heart, and what could be more horrific than being forced to be decisive in a high-pressure timed environment? Not to mention, the Resident Evil 2 remake played with the expectations of old school players by throwing in a few curveballs where they thought they knew what was going to happen, but ended up being surprised by a liquor changing position or an item not being where it used to be. Maybe these live selections could call their bluff in a similar way by not having actions play out in the manner that they used to. Now that would be evil. Capcom has already said that it plans to follow the original RE3's example by having the remake be more action-focused when compared to Resident Evil 2. But we're hoping it doesn't go too far down the all-guns-blazing path. Even though Resident Evil 3 was designed to be slightly more action-oriented, and Jill is a trained member of the elite STARS team, Capcom should look at the success of the Resident Evil 2 remake as a sign that people want the slow burn and survival horror of older Resident Evil games over the more frenetic shooter elements of later RE titles. Here's hoping the game looks to and expands upon the puzzle-solving elements of Resident Evil, instead of throwing lengthy combat sequences in for the sake of padding. On that note, we hope the team are up for telling a good story, one that digs in and maybe even deals with themes of grief, fear, and trauma via Jill's experiences at the mansion. We know she's a former officer who quit following the outbreak but remained in the city to protect civilians. Maybe the remake can expand on why she made the choices that she did.
Glad to meet you, lady.
But at the same time, it's important that the RE3 remake doesn't take itself too seriously, is still a little bit camp, and that there are lighter moments of almost unintentional comedy.
You want stars? I'll give you stars.
One of my absolute favourite parts of all the Resident Evil games happens in 3, when Jill has an uncharacteristic moment of despair when you decide to jump out the window of the cable car, screaming that it's useless and crashing out head first.
It's useless!
Poetic cinema. That is how you make an exit. More of that, please. Finally, and this might just be us, but we're hoping there isn't going to be a huge focus on the Resistance stuff. It's good that Capcom is continually unafraid of trying new stuff. That's one of the things that the developer/publisher consistently does better than a lot of other studios. But at the same time, we really hope that the included 4v1 asymmetric multiplayer mode doesn't impact on the RE3 remake being seen as its own standalone project like 2, or stop it from being a full-length single-player title. We will, however, give it props for giving one of its characters the ridiculous name of Martin Sandwich. Almost certainly a nod to Jill herself and the infamous line spoken by Barry Burton in the original Resident Evil.
That was too close. You were almost a Jill sandwich.
You're right.
Despite the lukewarm reception when it was first announced, it's still possible that Resistance could be worth our time. Joining skilled engineer and mechanic Sandwich, other characters in Resistance include Samuel Jordan, a 21-year-old boxer, January Van Sant, a hacker, Valerie Harmon, a student, Tyrone Henry, a firefighter, and Becca Woollett, park ranger. These guys will be up against another player who will be able to lay down monsters and traps in order to take down those survivors who dare oppose them. Will it stand up, or will it join the ranks of Operation Raccoon City and Umbrella Corps as RE games that nobody really asked for and nobody really played? Well, maybe that's the idea behind packaging it up with the RE3 remake, after all. So include all that stuff, Capcom, and we'll be happy. Oh, and maybe have the original soundtrack available, like it was in the RE2 remake? And definitely have a Regina outfit for Jill. Cool? Cool. Anyway, if you enjoyed this video, do give it a like and subscribe, and stay tuned for lots more RE3 videos coming up in the very near future. Thanks for watching. Stop.